Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, understood. Yeah.
A big thank you to you all for coming this afternoon. I've actually had the privilege of seeing this talk, so I know you're in for a treat. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr Stuart Eves. Stuart is our Director of Studies in Veterinary Medicine here at Selwyn, and we always have a thriving cohort of veterinary students here at the college, and of course in Cambridge anyway. You don't need any specialist knowledge to enjoy and find this talk fascinating, and I think you'll find Stuart not only a very good guide, but very happy to answer any of your questions that you may have, either during or principally afterwards, after the talk.
I will put a caveat, and I know there's a couple of colleagues out there, and I'd prefer if they didn't ask me the questions. That would be lovely.
All right. So without further ado, Stuart Eves.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So hopefully I'll show you the star of the show is actually my toy here. And really to give you an idea of the stories, you probably know a couple of years ago we developed this building, so we've now got the auditorium. And I will say that when Mike asked me to do this, I said the only way you're getting me to do it is if I get to do it in the auditorium, because this space is truly brilliant to present in. What we did though was we also have the library upstairs, so we actually converted our own library into a group of workspaces for supervisions, and myself and one of the medic dosses turned around and said, well, if we could be a bit cheeky, it would be nice to have a dedicated veterinary and medicine room. We have a lot of things that we tend to kind of store in the veterinary medicine side. It's nice to have a place for them that people can access them. And I'll be honest, they said yes way too easily. So we got cheeky and said, well, if that's the case, can we have anything new for it? And I was working on the principle, I don't know if anyone else did this, but you know, when you were young, if you wanted a dog, you asked for a pony, with the idea that hopefully you get something in between. And myself and Grant Stuart turned around and said, well, they've got this new technology. This was post-COVID when we really felt that this kind of thing would be useful. And we put in our cheeky bid. And they rather graciously went ahead with it. So we are the only place in Cambridge that I'm aware of that own an Anatomage table. It is being kind of, or it's certainly of interest in places like the vet school and Adam Brooks. We've got a lot of the surgeons are quite interested in using it for their teaching. So it's really quite exciting. Why I believe there's real strength in this is because anatomy's got to the stage where, or at least technology's got to the stage where we do get a lot of 3D, and the books and all of the other things that are available are great, but I will hope to prove to you today that there is nothing quite like this. So fingers crossed. Yeah, I certainly need to perform my part. So if I did do the big reveal, can we get the lights down just a bit? Not least because when I did this before, it's lovely to see it on the big screen. But here is our subject today. So this is our dog. What I will say to you is that this is actually a human table. So the real design is for the human side of things. But if I just bring my menu across here, if I show you just the veterinary species that we have loaded on, not all to this detail, but if I just quickly run down here, you get a vague idea of the diversity of what we can do with this table. And this is just the animal side, which I would argue is, if you like, an aside to the human parts. And if anyone's around later, obviously I'm probably not going to do this human stuff today, but if anyone wants to see things like hearts or my area, which is brains, I can certainly do that if that's what people want. Anyway, here's our dog. And the first thing I thought I'd do is just what we teach the first year vet students when they first come in. Their first taste of anatomy is just what we call the directions, the anatomical directions. So what we tend to do is say the back of the animal we call dorsal. And then, if you like, the belly of the animal we tend to call ventral. And this allows us to really describe how things like muscles run or bones run. We can use those as well to say that something runs ventrally or dorsally. And it allows us to kind of, piece together how the animal is put together. We also have the kind of front to back axis. So we have cranial up here and caudal here. So again, moving towards the tail will be caudally. and moving forward is cranially. And this is where also we start running into what you're going to come across as being the real problem with the head, because cranially technically refers to, let me get my pointer up, the cranium, which is really the skull up here. So we actually need to bring in another landmark forward of that, which is rostral, which is really, if you like, the muzzle that comes in. So we use those, and I guess I'm using this to build up to the first big reveal, which is what we can then do is effectively start removing the rest of the dog. And I've told it to just leave the skeleton in place. So we'll go back through various things, but what I'm going to do is just go here, and what we're going to do is start piecing together the bones. Once I've done this, I'll probably do the first kind of question thing as much as anything to kind of break this up. So by all means, think of your questions now. That would be great. We've got the catch box, which is a microphone and a soft box, so we can certainly run that. What we're going to do, we'll start off first of all, and hopefully I'll be able to display why this is so good for teaching. We're going to first of all work our way down the spine, so we're going to talk about the vertebrae. So what we've got up here is we've got the first 7 vertebrae, numbers 1 to 7, that are effectively the neck. So what we've got here, you can see the first 2 are really well designed for what they do, which is really to hang the head. So we've got these 2 vertebrae called the axis and the atlas. And as I rotate round, hopefully you can make out there the first of the cervical vertebrae, the first of the neck vertebrae there, and then the second one there. They both allow slightly different movements of the head. But really the idea is hopefully this helps you to see how each one of these vertebrae is actually designed for what it does. It has its own unique position. We then run our way down the other 7 that you can see kind of disappearing down here. After that, we have our next set of vertebrae, which are called thoracic. And what I might do is if I just rotate, we can see from above, and you can start seeing them peering out here. So thoracic really refers to the thorax, so the rib cage, and you can see them there. And what you start to notice about these ones is you start to see these large prominences at the top. So these are the thoracic vertebrae spines and are really characteristic of the vertebrae. And again, you can probably make out that each one has its own particular shape. They all follow a theme, but they have their own particular shape as they go. After the thoracic, we have the lumbar. So once we stop articulating with the ribs, so there's the last 2 there, we have our lumbar vertebrae. These are the ones that people tend to suffer with. Often it might ring a bell with some people. The thoracic vertebrae can be things where we can tend to get an awful lot of problems. But really you can see that these are designed their own way as well. So what we've got here is, again, they don't have the spines that we had on the thoracic vertebrae, but what we start to see is these wings sticking out from the side. And again, if I rotate round from above, you get to see these quite well. And again, I would stress that this is where the table is useful, maybe compared to something like a book, because obviously on the book you do get the images rotated round, but you don't get to rotate them, you just get them in a fixed position. So it's really nice to be able to do this and appreciate them in place. I can, of course, remove the rest of the animal and literally just leave one of those in place if need be. Okay. So we have our thoracic vertebrae going down to the last of the major kind of group of vertebrae, which is this one here. So this is the sacrum, or the 3 sacral vertebrae in the dog. I say 3, you'll probably notice that it looks like really we've only got 1 there, but they're actually fused. And with the eye of faith, you might be able to make out that you can see almost 3 individual bumps at the top, 3 individual spines that have actually kind of fused together as these vertebrae fused. That's really for stability, because you can also see really that the main role of those group of vertebrae is to articulate with the structure of the hind limb. So they have to be fused really for the strength. And yeah, it's there. And you find in different animal species, so when you start looking at horses and cattle, you start finding there's actually more vertebrae fused into the sacrum for more strength. And then last but not least, the coccygeal vertebrae, so basically the tail vertebrae. Huge numbers of variation there, depending on the different kind of types of dog, but we have our coccygeal vertebrae there. Now, as we basically make our way through the rest of the bones, what we're going to do, so I'll quickly just put in the other things, bonus mark for the ribs. hopefully everyone is aware, but they articulate with those thoracic vertebrae. Then we bring in the sternobrae. So these are the ones that often don't get talked about, but effectively these are the ones that then join the ribs in the midline. The sternobrae running down here, so we can bring those in, and obviously they're the ones that we can feel in ourselves, and is useful to be aware of. Now, with the exception of the head, that actually covers the main axial skeleton. So that actually covers the body construction of the skeleton. It's really just the limbs that are left. Now, what I'll do is, before I go on to those, I will just use the machine to demonstrate really why we don't talk about the skull. Now, we do the skull in the second year for the vets and medics because it is complicated. But again, the table illustrates really why it is quite so complicated. So there's 50 bones in the skull alone. But at least the table allows me to show you, first of all, the major ones on the external surface. So if I rotate round, you can see the ones that form the cranium and form the main part of the skull. And then if I bring up my second preset, what I've done is I've ghosted out those bones and I've left intact the ones that are actually internal to the skull. And again, this is just really helpful for the students to see because they'd be seeing it in cut section. I have to admit, we have graffitied some of the skulls we have in the dissection room where we painted them. So we do have something actually which looks quite similar to this. However, it always felt a little bit like sacrilege and a little bit rude for the individual. But it is possible to do this, but I do love the fact that we can bring these up, that we can ghost things out and actually look at the structures in place. Right. Keep an eye on the time. Right, if I go back to my first image and I just pull those things away, the last things I promised you on the skeleton were the bones of the limbs. And again, what I can do is I can just start filling in each one of these. So we've got the scapula up here. This is the shoulder blade. Obviously in us, rotated around the back, but in the animals, actually kind of externally, or on the outside of the animal. And what's really useful here is, again, it can be quite hard for the students to actually imagine where these things are in real life. But the fact that you can build the dog back over the top can be really quite useful because it gives them an idea of where they're actually feeling for, where they're palpating to pick these things up. I've lost my, here we go. So below that we've got the humerus, which forms a region called the brachium. And then we've got these two individual bones here. If I zoom in, we've got the radius and the ulna. And they form a region called the antebrachium. There is no test on this, I need to say at this point. You don't need to remember any of this. I won't be promising that to any of my vet students, but at the moment, please don't feel like there's going to be a test. Then we have a region called the carpus, or the wrist. There are a whole group of little bones in here which we're just going to have a little quick look at in a minute, but that is the wrist region. And then we have the paw, which is called the manus. Okay, so there's a lot of bones, and what you can see is the general design is at the top we have one bone, then we go down to two, and then it basically becomes many. And it seems to be this general thing. It's probably, for point of view of mobility, and also from the point of view of saving weight, that it tends to follow that design. It's the same design as we're going to see on the back, where we go from single bone to two bones to many. But if I just highlight those for you, we've got the pelvis up here. I have to say, that means I almost have to take back exactly what I've just said, because I said it's one bone. Technically, the good money is on the pelvis being three separate bones, maybe four. But you can see here, they're fused together, but we've got the ilium and the ischium. And then we've got this one here called the pubis, if I can get it, if I can rotate round. We've got the pubis in there. But you get an idea that we've got these kind of sets of bones which have been fused together to make the pelvis. Then we have the femur, a region called the crus, which is the fibula and the tibia and fibula, which are there. And then we have our foot, which is the pes, and those two are joined together by a region called the carpus, called the tarsus, which is effectively the ankle region. For me, the ability to just be able to drag around these names and put them into place is really where the power is. And what I've done is I've set this up so that our students can do that. It's part of the practice. It's part of how they learn, basically, to kind of put these names in place. And we can do it for the individual bones as we go. So what I'm tempted to do is stop talking for a minute and basically say, look, if anyone wants to ask anything about any of that, like I say, technical questions are welcome. But as much as anything about the software or anything else, then you'd be very welcome. You don't have to. No pressure. Yeah.
Can you load scans from actual people?
Yeah.
In?
Yeah, so we can get daikon files. We need permission,
Yes.
obviously. But yes, and that's part of how it is. The company are very interested in us uploading scans for them. I have suggested that they need to talk to me about payment before we would do that. But yeah, absolutely. It's if you can get a daikon file, it can be loaded in and it can be accessed. So yeah, absolutely. There's one of our fellows is the university librarian, and she's talking about taking some of their artifacts and scanning them so they can 3D manipulate. We would also be able to do it with historical artifacts and have with the same kind of level of thing. It's whatever you want to do with it if you can get the file, which is quite exciting.
How is the imaging produced when an item is scanned or models?
Yeah, so for the human side, there were 4 donors who provided the full body dissections that you have in here. In this case, there was a beagle who was, I think, elected in order to do that. And then there are a lot of the other examples are, again, it's people's scans that have given permission for them to be loaded on. So we now have, we get automatic updates. We have a lot of COVID scans for COVID pathology, which is on here for the medics. And that came through recently as a result of an update because those scans become available.
And then the medium, really, is it MRI?
CT, MRI, and then there are pro sections on here. So effectively 3D renderings of the material. And there's, I can certainly bring it up now. It's going to be one of my big wows later on, but I'm very happy to do it now, which is I can bring up. So this is a flash frozen section of the dog. I got in trouble when I demonstrated this to the alumni office because I kept calling them cuts, which I don't think was appreciated. Sections, but you can see we run through here, and again, the wow factor is if I click on it, it will actually tell me what those muscle groups are. So it's a whole group of different media.
Is the software able to show these structures in motion so you can see their natural movements?
There is for the heart, there is for a group of, I can bring up the heart later on and things, so there are for certain things, but not for everything, no. What you can get with the human side is blood flow to any organ. It will show it going out and coming back in, so it will go through the aorta, it will show you the route through the different blood vessels, and then it will show the returning route through the venous system. So you get that level. The heart is very good, but not for everything. But yeah, hi. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there these plans to show ways in which there can be abnormalities in skeletons, muscles, and organs?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the human side, what speciality would you like? Brain, heart, blood? You can choose. You can have heart. There we go. These are the cases that we would be able to show the medical students. And that's on the heart side. So yeah, yet to be disappointed. What I might do is move on, but if there are others, that would be absolutely great. But my promise to everyone that I would stay on time because I joke, and I actually have my daughter in the audience, but there are photos of basically 3 things on my phone. One of them is my kids. One of them is pretty much this place, and the other one is the table. So I get ribbed by all the other fellows of quite how enthusiastic I am on this, and I promised I'd stick to time, and I will do my best to. But there will be time for other questions, I promise. I also need to, for all the technology we have, I never quite got to sticking to time. and keeping organised. So here we go. The one thing I did say before is that I'd show you a little bit on the kind of muscles and things. So I've got a different section on the animal now. I managed to avoid cut. But we have the wrist and the kind of hock region as well of the dog. And the question is why we have all these individual bones. That's the thing I kind of made out. Well, if I bring up the next section, which is exactly the same thing, but what I've done is I've just left 2 of the muscles intact, or I think 3 of the muscles intact, and I've false coloured them. And you can start to see where these muscles would originate from, where their point of origin is. In this case, it's coming up from the back of the ulna and then it's running its way down, and you can see that it's inserting itself onto that little bone there. That's why we have this prominence. We have another muscle there that we can see running their way down. And the machine allows me to basically group muscles according to maybe their action, so I can colour in all the ones that have a certain action. We can do it to location, we can do it in various different ways, which is a very powerful way of the students learning. What's really lovely as well is, again, I can put the dog back in, and I will say to you, there is no other medium where you can put the dog back together, okay? No matter how much skill we think we have, this is something else. And I do like the fact that once we've got these muscles in place, you can actually highlight other muscles in the location because you get that idea of the kind of 3D interaction of them. It's really lovely from that point of view of leaving what you want, but being able to put the others back in as they go. And you're all desensitising to it, which is lovely. I have groups of students, certainly the kind of the wannabe medical students come in and we do some, we use the table and they're all quite nervous at the beginning. And within about 5 minutes, they've all, well, they've shamed themselves with their dissection, but they're all very nervous at the beginning, so that's good. I will also say that I can take screenshots of any of this at any time. I can broadcast this, so I do Zoom dissections for schools, but it's really useful for our students to be able to take the kind of snapshots. Right, we move on. We're going to go inside now. So what I've done now is we're going to do the first of the kind of internal organ systems, and what I thought I'd bring up is the respiratory system. So what we have here is the trachea coming down, and then we have the lungs on either side. And you just get a kind of, you get a feel for where they are, the space that they occupy. People maybe think they take up the entire rib cage, and that's not the case. It's also useful for kind of when we look around the back, you can see that actually on the right-hand side, so on the right lung, you can actually make out, if we look from behind, you can see that actually the right lung sneaks across. It has this accessory lobe which kind of sneaks across onto the left-hand side. And there's a kind of, you can see that there's a space missing. We can see the trachea coming down, and then we can see the splitting of the bronchi. So these are the 2 kind of tubes that go to the lungs. But you can see that there's an obvious space for something, or I hope obvious space for something missing in there. And that allows me to bring up my next section. So here we are with the missing piece. The heart would then be in that gap between the 2. So imagine that accessory lobe kind of moving around the back and occupying the back part of the heart. But we have the heart in place. I've also, while I've got the skeleton in place, what I've done is I've really removed a couple of the ribs on this side. But it is worth mentioning that we actually use those ribs to really locate where the heart is, and we'd use it to locate where the valves of the heart would be when we're listening. Because you get the idea that where these ribs come down, these are the ones I've ghosted out, but where these ribs come down, they actually overlay certain parts of the heart, and that allows us to locate where those valves would be when we're listening. So very useful for that, as is once again the fact that I can put the dog back over the top so the students really get a good idea of actually where you're directing yourself to on the outside, because the chances are if you're looking at the heart, then things haven't gone awfully well at that point. Okay. The other thing we have is the blood vessels coming out of the heart, so you can start to make these out here. If I zoom in, you can start to make these out, but we've got the heart in place there. And you can see what I'm going to do actually, this is something you don't get to say every day, is I'm going to remove the lung. So we'll take the lung away from that side, and you can start to see these blood vessels coming out. So we've got the pulmonary artery there, you can see it kind of runs in 2 different parts. This I've coloured blue because it's taking the deoxygenated blood out of the heart. And you can see that it kind of spreads out into those structures, one of which I've just removed, but it spreads out into the lungs to pick up the oxygen from there and deliver the carbon dioxide. And then we've got the ones I've coloured red, which are going to be the pulmonary veins on either side. You can see them disappearing back into the heart when I highlight them. These are the ones that are pulling the oxygenated blood back out of the lungs and putting it into the heart. And again, it just allows us to see everything in situ, which is very much appreciated with all of this. Now, before I move off of this, and I'll certainly give you a chance for another set of questions in a minute, what I'm going to do is put in the last kind of big player in this system. There are other things in the thorax, but we wouldn't have time for those today. But the last big player in this system, which I need to look up on my list, which is this guy here, we put in the diaphragm. Okay, and actually, here we go. We'll put in the diaphragm. So this is a big sheet of muscle that we have. Arguably, its main role is in breathing. So what will happen is when the muscle contracts, it actually flattens out. So you can see its dome shape from where we are. But when it contracts, it will actually flatten out, and that will pull the lungs down, and that will be part of the inhalation process. But it also basically forms the border between the thoracic region and then the lower parts of the dog, the more caudal parts. And this is going to be the abdomen and then the pelvis. So diaphragm is the kind of really important landmark within all of this. And what's going to become clear as we go through is, as you can see, I think the best view is actually from behind here. You can see that we have holes through the diaphragm. Now, they won't be holes in real life. There's the potential for things to move through them. So what we would call a hernia, where something moves its way through an already present anatomical hole. But you can see them there, and again, this is really useful when we start building in the other structures. You're going to start seeing what actually runs through the system. Wonderful. Now, I need to remember to use the microphone. I'm sorry about that. Another chance for any questions if anyone wants, and as much as anything to give a bit of a piece on information.
Does that work? Yeah. It looks like you're quite familiar with the kind of user interface in the table. Obviously, I guess you've had a bit of practice. How hard is it for perhaps the more experienced members of staff to get used to handling this as opposed to the more traditional methods of teaching? And like, how long does it take to get comfortable with it such that you can teach and feel happy?
Sure. The genuine answer is the main problem is the level of detail. It is easy to run it in a basic fashion. It's almost, one of the things I've done is disable a lot of the functionality at the beginning just so people can use it easily. Once you get good with that, fine. What I would say, without wanting to, I don't think I'm going to offend any of kind of colleagues in the room, but the 16-year-old students I have who come down for summer schools use this like they've known it their entire lives. It's unbelievable. So I guess I'm of a generation where this is still quite new and you get your head around it. So yeah, it takes a bit of training, and that's one of the things. A lot of other colleges are interested in using it, which is absolutely fine. It comes at a cost, but it is. I've said to all of them, unless your supervisor is willing to actually be able to use it to some degree, then there's not much point, because the students will use it much more quickly than they are, but they need that. So in its basic form, fine. I think as you then start to develop, you need to spend time on the table to be actually good at it. I've racked up about 200 hours on this. Yeah, my fingerprints are all over it in no short. I say I've loved every minute. That's the really sad thing. I have willingly given my time, and I keep discovering new things, and you think, oh, that will be brilliant. So yeah, excellent. Hi, yeah, oh, perfect.
A different question. I'd like to ask about this specific dog, if I may.
Yeah.
Somebody asked a good question about abnormalities. Is this a perfect specimen, or kind of what's wrong?
The dog side, there is no description. On the human side, for the 4 main cadavers that they have documented every abnormality that. because it's going to happen in any individual there are. And there is every abnormality documented in it, and it's why they've actually got 4 separate cadavers. So there's 2 male, 2 female, and that is really the whole point. So that they can say, first of all, obviously, ultimately there was a cause of death, and that in each one will be seen. But there are also that this person has a bony spur here, they have this, they have that, so it is all documented on that, yeah, absolutely. In terms of the dog, I haven't found anything different. It looks like a really good specimen to me in terms of arthritis and everything else. That all looks good. Obviously, what we did discover is she's female, which adds a layer of difficulty when we teach the male anatomy, but we'll deal with that. But yeah, no, otherwise, I certainly haven't I haven't detected anything, but I haven't been looking for trouble either. Cool. Wonderful. I will keep going. Hopefully I'm keeping you entertained, but I will keep going. So what we're going to do next, let me just check, we're on here. Yes, so number 9. I have all these preset because it's important to kind of do it quickly and know what I'm cutting away and what I'm not. What I thought we'd do then is, given we've done the heart, we will do the rest of the cardiovascular system. So what I can basically do is I've put all the blood vessels on here, and again, what's quite useful is I can build the dog back up over the top. So if we're looking for where the blood vessels are running, I can do it while at the same time obviously building the muscles in, because we need to know where they're running because we want to know where to locate them. So it's very useful for that point of view. So we have the main vessels, and again, if I click on any of them, if I just zoom in a bit, if I click on them, it'll actually tell me what the name of them are. Again, any of the vets out there will know the horrors of trying to remember all of these things and where they are and where they go. But then the other thing, I think if I'm now on 10, is I've put up a very similar image where we've got all of those blood vessels still in place. But what I'm going to do is just peel them away, because illustrating the point before, the really important thing is that you can be flooded with detail on these things. And sometimes it's really important to just focus on the main ones. So here are the major blood vessels we have. We're used to the heart now. We have the main vein draining the rest of the body. So we have the vena cava. We have this inferior, which is going to run up from the legs. We have the superior, which is effectively coming down from the head and the kind of upper body. And then we have the main blood vessel, which actually supplies oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. So we have the aorta. You can see the aorta just kind of making its way out of the heart here. The aortic arch then coming round, and then it forms the aorta proper as it runs down towards the legs. And again, I can build the detail over the top, but what's really crucial on this is the students honestly feel quite flooded with detail at the time when you're trying to teach them all of these different blood vessels and more besides this. And sometimes it really just is important to be able to focus on those main ones to give them the understanding of that. And again, I can highlight any one of these and just show them the route if it's required. So really good from that point of view. There is actually, I've got the blood flow up here. Somebody asked about the blood flow. So because I've got the whole body up, it's actually showing the blood flow here to everything through the aorta. But if we were selecting a certain organ, it would actually show that flow through as it goes, which is pretty, if nothing else, isn't it? If there's not any fireworks on, then that's definitely the thing for you. Wonderful. Are we still going? Oh, I didn't know it did that. There you go. I'm always discovering stuff. There you go. I need to stop pressing buttons. I apologise. You could lose me for 5 minutes while I start experimenting again. I need to not do that. I've got to remember I've got an audience. Right, okay, let's keep going. So what I think we're doing now is we're going to start moving into the abdomen, and we're starting to get towards the kind of the later parts of the talk. So we're going to move towards the abdomen, but where we were before is I spoke to you about the diaphragm really being the junction between the thoracic cavity and the abdomen. And I said that there were these holes that ran through the diaphragm. Well, to some degree, I've highlighted the things that are going to go through them now. So the part of the story we're going to go on to is the digestive tract. So one of the things that's going to have to pass through the diaphragm is going to be the esophagus, which is effectively the food tube, if you like. That's the one that's going to go down to the stomach. stomach being located in the abdomen. So we've got the hole there. You can also see an old friend coming through, so that's the inferior vena cava. We've just mentioned that one. But that's going to have to go through at some point, and we can see just where it kind of penetrates the diaphragm there. The aorta is sneaky, it goes up and over the top, but we can see it running up, and that will be near the vertebral column. So if I build the dog back in, you can see where the aorta runs there, and as it runs through. But the one I really want to show off is, while there are numerous nerves which actually work their way down, there is a rather famous nerve called the vagus. Technically two nerves, a left and a right, but what they do is they basically start mixing together as they run their course. And you can see the vagus running down here. And again, what we can do is highlight them, but you can see where that actually basically follows the structures through and penetrates into the abdomen through all of those different holes that we have. So it's nice to kind of see where we've got this diaphragm, but you can actually see how it allows the passage of some of the more important kind of structures to make their way through. Again, it's something we have to go through with the vet students, because those holes are the potential for other things to make their way through if there are things like increased abdominal pressure or if there is a problem. So it's important to know about those. Right. So that brings us to the abdomen. We're getting there. So we did the diaphragm, and you'd be forgiven for thinking that what we've got left here is once again the diaphragm in place, but this is now the liver. So you can kind of make out that the diaphragm would have been perfectly shaped to encompass the liver. On the far side from me, the diaphragm would be, and then effectively we've got the liver then in place. We'll see what it does in a minute, but what you can also make out is on the other side, again, we've got a really well-defined surface, and something is going to sit in that surface really rather neatly. I'm building up the anticipation, but something is going to sit rather nicely in this kind of surface in here. But what we also have is another couple of structures. So we've got the pancreas here, and then just tucked in, we've got the gallbladder that you can make out there. So as soon as we pass through the diaphragm, we start encountering these structures. Now, I'll look at the liver in a second, but really the role of the gallbladder and the role of the pancreas is once food comes out of the stomach, what we're going to do is we're going to have the pancreas and the gallbladder actually joining onto the tube at that point, because its role is really to act on the food stuff as soon as they leave the stomach. So I think I've built its part about as much as I can. The big structure that is missing in that groove is the stomach. Okay, but hopefully you begin to see how the anatomy comes together, how everything is kind of designed. You know, there is no space left. So we've got the esophagus coming down. We have then the stomach there, and then you can kind of see where the pancreas will then kind of attach itself to the very end of the stomach, with the gallbladder just kind of sneaked in there. So we've got those structures in place, really to just begin the gastrointestinal tract. As we go on, it's really difficult to then go on and talk about the intestines and the large intestine, because they are in fact a long tube. I don't want to play them down, but they are a very long tube. They are all tangled up, and any of the Selwyn vet students will know Dr Chivers, my predecessor's dance of the old school ties, where he kind of describes the twisting as the intestines developed. It's one of those landmark moments in your education when you've been through that little rigmarole. But really, I could spend a lot of time talking about them, and in many ways there's not much point. What I want to do with this is actually demonstrate one of the things that we do struggle to get across to the students at times, which is there is a specific blood vessel which basically serves the intestines, and it's something called the hepatic portal system. Now, I'm bringing it up here, so as I zoom away, I've left it intact. So the actual hepatic portal vein is here. The reason it's quite a specialist thing is because The usual way in which we set up arteries and veins is what you have is you have the arterial system, you have the capillary beds, and then you have a vein that takes it back to the heart. But what we need to do in the gastrointestinal tract is actually have an arterial system which goes out to the stomach, the intestines. Then we need a capillary bed, but then you actually need a second blood vessel to take the blood from the gastrointestinal tract to the liver. It has to go to the liver first for processing, for detoxification, for all these things. So we actually have 2 capillary beds in this system, and we link them together with this portal vein. Now, it can be a location where we have all sorts of different problems, but the really important thing is, again, this technology allows me to really demonstrate where we have, you can see the intestines, and you can see the veins kind of embedded in the intestines, but then you can make out the portal system actually draining that blood, the one I've got highlighted as I get rid of it, actually draining that blood back into the liver for its processing. So it's a really nice way of illustrating where it is and how it runs. I will say on the human side, again, the level of detail goes up a notch, and you really can see all the individual branches, and it is fantastic. But on the vet side, I'm still really happy with what this can do. Right. I guess I'll leave it maybe for, I'm doing well for time. I'll leave this for another maybe break and just see if there are any other questions, and then we'll do the last few systems that I'll do, but it will certainly be quicker there. So.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice not to be throwing the box because I'm usually doing that. Anyway, thank you so much for all of this. You mentioned that surgeons at Adam Brooks are quite interested in this. Can you talk about whether it's possible to perform any kind of surgery on this, or kind of actually manually cut things away?
Yeah. So there's, again, I would say on the human side, because of the level of detail, that can be really useful. I would say that this is the really important point to say that there is no indication of this ever taking over from real life dissection.
Yeah.
And we've always been adamant, like certainly when we were making the case for this, we never wanted to do that, because there are skills, there is the touch, there is the feel, that there is no way that this could recreate, ever. In terms, however, though, of, the operating side, what it can be quite useful for is surgical approaches. Yeah. So I've just made my incision. What's going to happen is it's just going to calculate what we're going to go through. And then if I click in that region, and this is where I have to be careful, because if I click outside of that box, it will strip the skin off all of the rest of the dog, but not that section. I'll go again. Oh, there we go. No, it's telling me I can do it now. There we go.
Oh, nice.
So you can actually therefore go through like this, and it will tell you each layer. So is it a replacement for surgery? Absolutely not. But is it there for, to some degree, learning familiarity, learning what structure you go for, what you're expecting, where the nerves would be, where the arteries would be? Yeah, that's where it is for us. Yeah. And again, later on, certainly when we're back in the old library, I can bring up some of the human sections, and you get an idea as to what it is, and that's what they're interested in. Yeah. So I'd probably argue surgery, less so in terms of the actual skills, but in terms of the anatomical knowledge, yeah, this is it. And there are medical schools where this is the only teaching they get. They use this table and nothing more. We think, or I think both have the benefits.
Hi, I mean, different area of question, which is, what is one of these tables worth? Because how accessible are they for other universities and for third world countries maybe who can't get the access to so many donations? Yeah,
I mean, this is it. I mean, this one came in at over 50,000. You know, it is. You know, that's why when I said we asked for a pony, we really asked for a pony. What we kind of did is obviously we thought of the benefit to the college in ways, because again, if people like Adam Brooks are interested, conference business comes in. We thought about the number of students we have. We have 8 to 10 medical students every year. We have 3 or 4 vets, depends on how many I get my way on. That all comes down to it. I guess you're correct on that, but what I would say is, so I'm also admissions tutor. I do a lot of outreach work for schools. We have Zoom loaded on here. So I do dissections for the students. So like you say, third world countries and things like this, there are ways of demonstrating it, there are ways of videoing it, there's ways of using it. It could be the solution. I think there is always that need for, like I say, hands-on, and we'll never get away with that. But in the idea of, in biology, the kind of, reduce the number that you're using, this, for me, may well be the answer. Hopefully, well, I don't want to plug for the company, but at the end of the day, the more that are bought, hopefully the cheaper it gets, you never know. If not, it's a couple of touch screens and a rather nice computer. Maybe we could knock one together, and if we can get everyone's CT scans together, we never know, we might be able to get our own version.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Yes, in a similar vein, I was going to say it's basically software and hardware and a nice input device. Do you see it morphing into a thing which could be run on a laptop and and individuals could use it rather than using a textbook, for example?
So you can remote access it from a laptop. It would be, obviously, if we gave the link to every medical student we had, they can only really access it one at a time because you put so much strain on the system. We have it in a room that's on a Salto lock, so a key card lock that all of the medical students can access as they need. It's the same room that has the bones and the various other things. The porters have nicknamed it the bones room, which is now stuck. So it's not the medical resource centre, it's now the bones room. We're stuck with that. So at least they do get access on it. You can get similar things online for an awful lot cheaper. Okay. There's no doubt. It doesn't have the functionality of this. It just straight doesn't. Again, for example, to highlight the fact is what I've done here is actually bring up the slideshow. So this is the histological sections. This is what you'd see under the microscope. So I can click on the kidneys, I can bring up the kidney, and then I can show them slides of what all the different parts of the kidney would look like under the microscope. It's those kind of things all built in. And at the end of the day, I guess the company do need to make their money.
Sure. Yeah.
It's that kind of thing where they've invested all the time and the effort in developing this.
But potentially in 5-10 years' time, hardware is more powerful. If they're prepared to license it at a certain cost, it could be more widely distributed without requiring a bespoke table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think some of this is to reproduce that feel of the dissection room for them, and there's that aspect of having full size. That the scalable nature is brilliant, but there is merit in having the same size and those kind of things. But yes, agreed. It will be interesting to see how it goes. What I in a way wish is that. So when COVID hit, we videoed all of our material. The students got to watch videos of dissection for a year. This would have been the answer for me. There's absolutely no doubt we could have done this. And it's things like that that just make you think, let's hope not, but you never know what's coming around the corner. And this gives us that reliability, this gives us the opportunity to do it. And I would say more than anything else, I did this for the students without shadow of a doubt. We did this for the students without shadow of a doubt. When I go on school visits, when I'm able to show them this stuff, I can do PowerPoint presentations where I can then show images and I can narrate over the top. There is a gift in that is very hard to describe. To have the 16-year-olds that want to be doctors be able to see this kind of stuff, that's great. That's really great. So the very last bits, as we go, where we're left. So the renal system, the urinary system. So I've left the kind of kidneys, the bladder, the ureters in place, and again we can just remove the dog around them. Often what surprises people is actually how far the kidneys are kind of in the animal, so how high they are, and also how far forward they are, because again, as you can see from the section, when I'm building across here, once again, we really are up against the liver. We really are kind of right forward up underneath the rib cage. You can also see that the right kidney is slightly further forward than the left. So we get those kind of, they're the things that I can illustrate to the students as we go. And again, this was the point where what I normally do is bring up the histology as well, because we can show them what the kidney looks like, because it's one of the structures, certainly one of the things we'd expect them to be able to see under a microscope and identify. Now, as we draw to a close, the last couple of things I really need to describe to you is how all of this is controlled. So we have the nervous system in here. So obviously false coloured. I thought it would be nice to have a nice luminous green spinal cord and brain. But obviously then we've got some of the other nerves. And again, I've just shown that we can colour code them. So what I've done is I've put the cranial nerves, the ones that actually come out from the skull, I have coloured in yellow. And then we've got the others, the peripheral nerves that come out. And again, I can click on any given nerve and it will tell us what that nerve is. In another section, what I've done for the students is I've built it up. So one of the things they have to learn is which muscles are innervated by which nerve. And it's really nice that what I can do is basically bring up a given nerve and show its tract, and then I can stick all the muscles in place. So you can strip away the rest of the dog and just leave those muscles by the nerve that innervates them as well. It's quite a nice way for them to learn them. And I can certainly bring one of those images up in a minute if that's helpful. And then finally, there is another system that doesn't ever really get discussed, or at least I think it's easier to miss, which is another control system called the endocrine system, the hormonal system. So what I've done here is I've left the important kind of structures in place for that. So actually one of the kind of little known, but certainly kind of facts that tends to get missed is there is actually a huge input from the nervous system on the endocrine system. So there's the pituitary gland up in the midbrain, which it's known as the master gland. It kind of runs the rest of them. But what I've also left here is we've got the thyroid glands. And again, we have to tend to locate these in animals. And again, the ability to just be able to build the dog over the top to get a reference point as to where the thyroid glands would be is really useful. Liver comes under an endocrine gland as well, producing factors. Pancreas. I've left in place here the adrenals, right next to the kidneys. We've got the adrenals. And then, like I say, we have a little girl here. So we have the reproductive tract. So we have the ovaries and the uterus in tract as well, in place as well. But they're the kind of two control systems. What I might do, because it is one of the things that I'm most proud of, and I won't lie, I've devoted so much of my time to, that I feel if anyone will appreciate it now will be quite useful, is if I can show, I've got the nerves, I'm not going to be able to find them, this is going to be embarrassing. I've got the nerves going, so I will just show you this. So this is actually one of the steeplechases I've set up for the students. This is them learning the muscles. They would have these in real life in the dissection room, but I can recreate them. So these little pins in the muscles, so they get the fun of naming the muscles. I have got an answer sheet for them, but they don't get it until I'm perfectly happy that they're upset enough by it. And then this is really by muscle group and nerve. These would be all the muscles that are innervated by the tibial nerve. So we have got the nerve in place. If I can pick him up, I'm not sure that I can here, but I've grouped all the muscles for them so that they can learn it that way if they want. We do have time for questions if there are. If nothing else, thank you so much for coming along. This, I hope I've got across. This is my pride and joy. I have found it incredibly useful for the students, and I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you very much.